Right now, one case dominates the American psyche, the vanishing of Nancy Guthrie. Her name, typed into any search bar, unleashes a digital flood of information and speculation. A deluge of press conferences, FBI updates, and doorbell footage dissected with forensic precision. Cryptic ransom notes, untraceable Bitcoin wallets, and DNA profiles that point to a ghost. In this vacuum, everyone has a theory, and everyone is convinced they know the truth. For the past 3 weeks, I have immersed myself in the labyrinth of this investigation, sifting through every press briefing, every leaked file, every interview, and every public record connected to this case. Court filings, property records, digital breadcrumbs from Google Trends data, forgotten banned pages, and exhaustive criminal background checks. I've encountered information so jarring, I had to read it 3 times, unable to believe what was in front of me. The narrative that has captured the public's attention is, on its face, deceptively simple. An unknown assailant selected an elderly victim, breached the security of her home under the cover of darkness, and abducted her. This is the official version of events, the one propagated by the sheriff's office and amplified by media headlines. And superficially, it seems plausible enough. But just beneath that fragile surface, a different and far more disturbing story begins to emerge. It is a story constructed from timelines that defy logic, and relationships that harbor questions too uncomfortable for anyone to voice. It is marked by a string of coincidences so intricate, so perfectly aligned, that to dismiss them as chance feels like an act of willful ignorance. My purpose here is not to point a finger. It is to lay out the facts I've uncovered, and by the time I am finished, the perception you hold of this case will be irrevocably altered. It all begins with a chillingly strange image, a man moving in reverse. On January 23, 2026, a peculiar video surfaced on the Ring Neighbors application. The footage shows a figure, late at night, ascending a residential driveway in the Catalina foothills, not staggering, not stumbling. This was not an intoxicated person. This was someone moving backward with calculated, rhythmic precision, his back held perfectly square to the camera's lens. His head is bowed, chin tucked tightly to his chest. To grasp the significance of this case, you must first understand why this backward motion is so critically important. Consumer-grade security systems, such as Ring and Nest, are not constantly recording. They exist in a dormant state, awakened by passive infrared sensors that detect the signature of body heat and movement. When a subject enters the detection field, the sensor must first trigger the processor. The lens then has to rapidly adjust to the ambient low-light conditions. Simultaneously, the Wi-Fi module negotiates a connection with the remote server. This entire activation sequence consumes between 1 and 2 critical seconds. Under normal circumstances, walking forward means that this initial delay captures an image of your face as you move toward the camera. However, by approaching in reverse, this individual guaranteed that during those crucial activation seconds, the camera recorded nothing more than the back of his hooded sweatshirt and his backpack. His face remained concealed until well after the lens was fully operational. In essence, he was physically exploiting the camera's inherent latency with his own body. This is not the signature of a common prowler. This is the methodology of an individual who has meticulously studied the technology's vulnerabilities, someone who has done their homework. And that is when I discovered the detail that truly stopped me cold. The backpack worn in the January 23rd footage appears to be identical to the one observed at Nancy Guthrie's home just 9 days later. An Ozark Trail 25-liter hiker's pack, distinguished by its unique reflective safety strips. The same pack, a different residence, 6.5 miles distant. The location, which can only be interpreted as a staging ground for a dress rehearsal, is significant. It is 6.5 miles from Nancy's residence. In the field of forensic geography, this is what criminal investigators refer to as a buffer zone. It is a calculated distance far enough from the primary target to obscure any direct link if apprehended, yet close enough to perfectly simulate the target environment. Both properties are situated within the Catalina foothills. Both are characterized by secluded desert properties set back by long, private driveways. And both fall under the same dark sky ordinances, ensuring minimal street lighting and creating vast pockets of profound darkness. This was not a random test location. He was deliberately choosing a simulator. And observe his reaction when a dog begins to bark. He retreats, yet he never breaks his backward orientation. He consciously overrode the primal, biological instinct to turn and face the source of the sudden noise. His discipline was such that he would risk stumbling, even falling, rather than afford the camera a single, fleeting frame of his face. This degree of control is not born from panic. It is the product of meticulous preparation. Now, let's contrast this individual with the figure seen on Nancy's porch 9 days later. On January 23rd, the subject is visibly tense, hunched over, paranoid about every digital pixel. By February 1st, however, he is no longer moving in reverse. He is advancing forward. His entire demeanor has changed. He is composed. He strolls toward the front door with a self-assuredness that is deeply unsettling. And then he performs an act so strange I had to review the footage 4 times to be sure of what I was seeing. He extends a hand and taps the camera's lens twice. The gesture is casual, almost rhythmic, like a speaker testing a microphone, or someone instinctively touching a familiar piece of furniture they pass every single day. Only 9 days prior, his fear of this very camera was so profound he walked backward to evade its gaze. Now, he is reaching out to make physical contact with it, almost as if he is taunting it. What could have possibly changed in those 9 days? The explanation is chillingly simple. The January 23rd incident was his field test. It was his classroom. He was the pupil. And when law enforcement failed to appear at his doorstep the following morning, he absorbed the single most dangerous lesson any criminal can. He learned that he was invisible. By the time he arrived at Nancy's house, the phase of experimentation was over. He was there to execute. After reviewing this evidence, one is left to wonder which version of the story they now believe. The details I am about to lay before you have created a deep schism online. On one side, there is the conviction that the man at the heart of this mystery is nothing more than a son-in-law consumed by grief. On the other, there is a chilling belief that he represents the single most dangerous element within this entire investigation. By the conclusion of this examination, you will be compelled to form your own judgment. Let us delve into the facts. In Tucson, Arizona, a house sits just 4 miles from Nancy Guthrie's front door. In the dead of night, with no traffic, it is a journey of a mere 10 minutes. A drive of only 2 in the morning. And inside that house reside Annie Guthrie, Nancy's eldest daughter, and her husband, Tommaso Cioni. Annie leads a creative life as both a poet and a jeweler, and she holds a position at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. During an interview conducted in 2013, she referred to her husband as her most profound teacher, describing him as a great manifester. His poetry, she explained, was not written with words, but with the very way he lived his life. Etch that phrase into your mind, a great manifester, because it will acquire a profoundly different weight by the end of this account. Tommaso Cioni is a 50-year-old science teacher. For more than 15 years, he has instructed students in advanced placement biology at a local Tucson charter school. His origins trace back to San Giovanni Valdarno, a small town nestled in the hills of Tuscany. He relocated to Arizona in 2006. By night, he plays bass in a local band called Early Black. By day, his interests are wholesome. He makes his own pasta. He is an amateur mycologist who forages for mushrooms, and a naturalist who studies lizards. By all public measures, he is a quiet man, living a life devoid of drama in the stark desert landscape. He is also the last person known to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy visited the home of Annie and Tommaso. The night was filled with the mundane warmth of family life. Dinner, games, shared time. And this is the first point where the timeline becomes critically important, because accounts of what happened next diverge significantly. Certain reports claim that Tommaso drove Nancy home himself, ensuring she was securely inside her house at roughly 9:50 p.m. But alternative accounts suggest it was Annie who drove her mother home. A third version insists it was both of them. The narrative has remained inconsistent, its form changing depending on who is speaking and when. In an investigation where every single minute is crucial, the persistent inability to establish who was the last person to physically see Nancy alive is not some minor point of confusion. It is a fracture at the very foundation of the timeline. At 1:47 a.m., the Nest camera system at Nancy's residence was manually disabled. If we accept the 9:50 p.m. drop-off as fact, that creates an unexplained gap of 3 hours and 57 minutes. Let us round that to 4 hours. 4 hours in the dead of night is an eternity. It is more than enough time to drive home and wait for the surrounding neighborhood to descend into sleep, to change into a disguise. Drive back to the location, park a safe distance away, approach the house on foot, and execute a plan and be back in your own bed before the world awakens. During that crucial window, no confirmed alibi for Tommaso has ever been publicly offered, nor has one been offered for Annie. They reside in the same house. The alibi of one is, by definition, provided by the other. Let that sink in. Now, we must examine what transpired on that porch, because the physical movements captured there are what break this case wide open. The individual on the recording did not carry themselves like a stranger to the property. Specialists in nonverbal communication and former federal investigators have observed that the suspect moves through the area with the subconscious ease of a person who has visited many times before. There is no scanning for the camera's location. He proceeds directly to it. There is no pause or uncertainty at the front door. He is familiar with the porch's layout, knows the placement of the potted plant he will use to block the lens, and is aware of the camera's exact position. In the field of criminal profiling, this is identified as ownership behavior. It reflects a mindset where the perpetrator feels an intrinsic, legitimate right to be present in that specific environment. His demeanor is not that of a burglar trespassing in an unfamiliar house. He behaves like a proprietor in his own territory, and the rhythmic tap on the camera lens that is not a calculated criminal act. It is a familiar, almost reflexive gesture. It is the type of action one performs on an object encountered daily. Now, you must ask yourself this: who else would possess a mental schematic of Nancy's home so profoundly ingrained in their mind that they could navigate its exterior in the dark without a single flicker of hesitation? Who would know the location of every camera? Who would have the inside knowledge that she lacked an active Nest subscription? Who was intimately familiar with her routine, her bedtime, her medications, and the exact configuration of her home's entry points? Tommaso Cioni regularly had dinner in that very house. He often helped Nancy with her errands. He and Annie even assisted with the management of her property. He had been passing through that very front door for close to 2 decades. If there is a single person on earth whose subconscious muscle memory could generate that precise pattern of movement on that porch, it is the very man who stood upon it just 4 hours before. But this is where the investigation introduces a paradox that is impossible to ignore. Because if Tommaso Cioni is one of the most suspicious figures in this case, he is also one of the most confounding. We must consider the suspect's gear. A $22 ski mask, purchased at a sporting goods store in Tucson, a desert city where it almost never snows. How many people are purchasing ski masks in Tucson in January? That transaction by itself would be a flag in any sales database. Then, a $10 pack of nitrile gloves, a $20 Ozark Trail backpack from Walmart, complete with reflective safety strips that would blaze like a neon sign when viewed with infrared technology, and a bellyband holster, strapped loosely over a thick jacket, where it flopped around an entirely improper way to wear such equipment. As one former Secret Service agent commented, no individual with even a single day of tactical training would ever handle a firearm in that fashion. The entire assembly of gear cost under $100. It practically radiates ineptitude. Now, hold that image in your mind and contrast it with the individual under our microscope. Tommaso Cioni is no transient, no uneducated vagrant. He is a man who instructs students in advanced placement biology. To operate at that level of academia requires a profound capacity for organization, for critical thought, and a deep-seated comprehension of cause and effect. One must possess intelligence, one must be methodical, and so, the argument from his defenders rings out with absolute clarity. Tommaso, they argue, is simply too intelligent to be this foolish. But I urge you to invert that entire premise. Consider, for a moment, the mindset of a highly intelligent individual meticulously plotting a crime they are determined will never be connected to them. If you are an intelligent, logical teacher of science, and your objective is to abduct someone without a trace, what is the single most critical element you require? You require law enforcement to pursue a phantom, a person who is the antithesis of who you are. So, what is your strategy? You construct a persona. You become an actor in your own production. You intentionally purchase the most inexpensive, ill-suited equipment imaginable from a chain retailer. You purposefully affix the holster incorrectly. Your goal is to have FBI profilers conclude that their quarry is an addict, or perhaps a drifter, thereby diverting all suspicion from the esteemed educator holding a master's degree. This theoretical strategy is known as calculated incompetence. And if that is indeed the scenario we are facing, then we must confront a chilling reality. The strategy is effective. It is succeeding precisely because we are engaged in this very debate. This apparent clumsiness is no accident. It could, in fact, represent the most sophisticated component of the entire operation. Then there is another dimension to the equipment, an element that has been largely overlooked: the gloves. Black nitrile gloves. These are not the leather tactical gloves of a professional, nor are they the latex gloves of a surgeon. They are nitrile. The kind of gloves commonly found in laboratories, the food service industry, and for household repairs. Now, consider for a moment the type of professional who would handle nitrile gloves on a daily basis as a fundamental part of their work. Biology teachers. Tommaso Cioni oversees advanced placement biology laboratories, where his students are required to handle specimens, various chemicals, and biological substances. Nitrile gloves are standard issue equipment within his classroom environment. Therefore, the presence of a box in his garage would not raise an ounce of suspicion. It is, in fact, entirely expected. And therein lies the problem. The sheer banality of the gloves renders them invisible. The perpetrator was also aware of additional Nest cameras positioned on the property, beyond the one at the front door. The sheriff's department confirmed that investigators are attempting to retrieve footage from these other devices, but it was revealed that Nancy lacked active subscriptions for them as well. The individual who breached that home possessed intimate knowledge of the complete camera network and understood that none of the devices were actively recording to the cloud. This is not the kind of information one could simply glean from a Google image search. It is the type of information acquired only by having been inside the residence, by participating in the camera installation, by being present when Nancy voiced her refusal to pay for a monthly service. It is the knowledge of family. At this point, we must turn to a detail that remarkably few have linked to this case. I urge you to pay close attention, because the chronology is paramount. In February of 2024, almost precisely 1 year to the day before Nancy's disappearance, Savannah Guthrie released a memoir titled Mostly What God Does. Within its pages, she recounts a peculiar childhood tradition that unfolded each and every summer. Her older cousin, Terry, would orchestrate an event the family referred to as a kidnapping of Savannah and her sister, Annie. This cousin would rouse them from sleep before sunrise, gather them into a station wagon, and begin the drive from Tucson to Phoenix. Somewhere along that route, the girls would find a payphone to call Nancy, reporting, "Mom, Cousin Terry has kidnapped us." And Nancy would participate in the charade. She would feign shock and alarm, promising she would come to their rescue in a matter of days. Allow me to repeat the critical elements. Savannah Guthrie published a book detailing her family's tradition of playing kidnapping games that originated from the very same house in Tucson, involved her sister Annie, and featured their mother, Nancy, playing her part over the telephone. 1 year after that book's publication, the game appeared to become reality. I am not positing a theory. I am simply stating what is written in a published work, available for purchase by anyone on Amazon for the past 2 years. You are left to decide what to make of that information. Now, we must trace the flow of money. In any investigation, finances represent either a motive or a misdirection, and in this particular case, the figures paint a remarkably specific picture. Nancy's residence in the Catalina foothills carries an estimated value of approximately $1 million. It has been in her possession since 1985. The home belonging to Annie and Tommaso, located just 2 miles away, is appraised at roughly $650,000. Tommaso's salary as a high school teacher places their household income substantially below 7 figures. By contrast, Savannah Guthrie's estimated net worth stands at a staggering $40 million. Her annual earnings from NBC are in the millions. The demand for ransom was for $6 million, to be paid in Bitcoin. That figure was not arbitrary. It was a calculated number, devised by someone who comprehended the intricate financial architecture of this family, someone who knew precisely what Savannah could afford and what amount would appear plausible. An unverified document has since emerged online, which appears to show that on May 16, 2025, Tommaso Cioni executed a durable power of attorney, granting his wife, Annie, complete control over the entirety of his financial, personal, and property-related affairs. Legal analysts will point out that such a document is a routine component of real estate transactions, and they would not be wrong. Power of attorney filings are a mundane, everyday occurrence, but the timing May of 2025 is anything but. This was 8 months before Nancy vanished, a detail that aligns perfectly with the earliest digital footprints, the first Google searches for her home address. Beginning in March of 2025, someone in Arizona started looking up Nancy's address. By May, Tommaso was meticulously reorganizing his legal affairs. In June, the address was queried again. Then, in December, a search originating from Tucson sought the salary of Savannah Guthrie. Does this mean the power of attorney is connected? While a definitive link cannot be established, what is certain is that during the spring and summer of 2025, at the very same time, someone in Arizona was researching Nancy Guthrie's private residence. Tommaso Cioni was putting his legal house in order. If one were planning an operation that could end in arrest or necessitate a disappearance, transferring control of assets to a spouse is not a routine act. It is preparation, and Annie is the one who ultimately holds everything. This path leads us to Annie, a figure largely ignored by the media, but one who has been under intense focus by the investigation itself. Her vehicle, as part of this case, was towed from her possession and impounded. Ashley Banfield first reported this development on her podcast, attributing the information to a law enforcement source she characterized as being exceptionally connected and highly regarded. While the sheriff later described processing the car as standard investigative practice, one must contemplate what impounding a vehicle truly signifies. You do not seize a family member's car in what appears to be a stranger abduction. A vehicle is impounded when there is reason to believe it may have been utilized in the commission of a crime, or that it may harbor crucial forensic evidence. What did they discover inside that vehicle? What, precisely, were they hoping to find? The public has never been told. Investigators conducted multiple searches of Annie and Tommaso's home. They photographed the rooms. They physically removed security cameras from the property. And then there is the detail that gives one pause. They examined the septic tank. A local news affiliate filmed investigators as they probed the tank with a long stick, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness inside. A septic tank is searched only when you are looking for something someone has tried to utterly destroy or conceal. After the first week, both Annie and Tommaso went publicly silent. Reporter Brian Anton, who has been covering the case from the ground in Tucson since its inception, noted that Tommaso had not been seen in almost a full week. He reported the last time cameras saw him, he was outside the house with Annie, together in a car. And then, nothing. Both of them, gone from public view at the same time. This recalls the conflicting narratives about who was last with Nancy. Some accounts place Tommaso as the driver. Others say it was Annie, and still others claim they were both there. In an investigation where the last individual to see the victim alive becomes the first person to be examined, such a glaring inconsistency is never dismissed as trivial. It represents either genuine confusion or calculated coordination, and seasoned investigators can tell the difference. Now, we must turn to an element that has made the online community deeply uncomfortable: Tommaso Cioni's inner circle. He plays bass guitar in a Tucson band called Early Black. One of his bandmates is a man by the name of Dominic Evans. Court records from Pima County reveal that Evans has previously faced charges for felony burglary, robbery, theft, and embezzlement. When Ashley Banfield named Tommaso as a person of interest, online investigators immediately began to vet his social sphere. Evans' name was the first to surface. In a related development, a SWAT team later raided a location in the area that was connected to the broader investigation. Consider the implications of that criminal record within the framework of this case. Burglary, robbery, these are not petty crimes. These are offenses that require entering private properties and taking things directly from people. If Tommaso needed an individual who understood the mechanics of breaking into a residence, someone who had done it before, someone who would not lose their nerve at the front door, he would not have had to look far. He would only have needed to look at the man standing next to him at band practice. I must be clear. There is no confirmed evidence tying Dominic Evans to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, but the proximity is a factor. The criminal background is a factor, and the fact that he exists within Tommaso's immediate social circle is a factor, especially because the sheriff has publicly confirmed he has not ruled out an accomplice. The forensic evidence supports this theory. The FBI uncovered 2 separate DNA profiles, one on a glove found discarded 2 meters from the house, and another from inside the home itself. The profiles do not match each other. They do not match anyone in Nancy's family, and they yield no hits in the national DNA database. 2 DNA profiles, 2 distinct locations, 2 people. That is not speculation. That is mathematics. One individual left genetic material inside Nancy's home, and a second, different individual left genetic material inside a glove along a potential escape route. If two people were involved in this crime, every theory revolving around a lone wolf stalker grows considerably weaker, and every theory pointing to an organized operation, one with a planner and a perpetrator, becomes substantially stronger. And here we arrive at the dark psychology of this case, an element that is not being discussed nearly enough. The video of the backward walker from January 23rd was uploaded by a regular homeowner using the Ring Neighbors app, which is essentially a social media network for local security. People post suspicious activity, stray dogs, package thieves. But in a crime this calculated, there exists a very high probability that the person responsible is also on that app, watching. He is not merely a ghost in the machine, he is a subscriber. A predator who stages a dress rehearsal 9 days in advance reveals an obsession not just with the act, but with the outcome. It's probable he spent the following morning compulsively refreshing the neighbor's app feed for that specific zip code, waiting, watching, to see if his presence had registered. He was monitoring the community's digital chatter, gauging his own invisibility. And when he saw the video posted, with no one able to identify him, it delivered something far more dangerous than luck. It gave him confirmation. The very technology engineered to create a sense of security had been weaponized, turned into a perverse feedback loop. He was using the community's own digital alert system to field test his disguise. And it was that validation that emboldened him, giving him the confidence to proceed forward rather than retreat into the shadows. 9 days later, the ransom notes materialized, sent not to Savannah Guthrie directly, nor to the family, but to TMZ and local Arizona news outlets. A professional kidnapper operates in the shadows, negotiating in private. They do not deliberately invite the press into the conversation, but an individual orchestrating the illusion of an outside threat, someone who needs the world to believe a stranger is responsible. They go straight to the media. Because with every headline that screams about a random kidnapper, another layer of misdirection is built, creating distance between the true perpetrator and the investigation. The anonymous tipster who first alerted TMZ to the ransom demand used a peculiar phrase, the main individual. That choice of words implies a hierarchy, a structure. It suggests the involvement of more than one person. It indicates that whoever contacted TMZ possessed an insider's understanding of the operation's layers and of the Bitcoin wallet where the ransom was to be delivered. That digital wallet has remained utterly dormant, a black hole of zero activity. The FBI baited a digital mousetrap, depositing a small sum of money into the account. They are maintaining a constant, round-the-clock vigil, waiting for the faintest sign of life for someone to log in and check the balance. The instant it is accessed, the user's device will betray them, sending a signal, an IP address, a location, a unique device identifier. But no one has taken the bait, and this inaction speaks volumes. A professional criminal organization would have moved that money almost immediately. They would possess the knowledge to access it anonymously, to launder it through the digital ether. But this suspect appears paralyzed. Either he knows it is a trap, or he is simply too terrified to make a move. This paints the profile of someone with the technical education to establish a Bitcoin wallet, but who lacks the street-level experience to understand how to use it safely. A science teacher, perhaps. Someone who comprehends the theory behind the mechanism, but falters when it comes to criminal execution in practice. And now, we turn to a detail in the larger picture that should be unsettling for everyone watching, the Today Show. In the time since Savannah stepped away, the program has surged back to the #1 position in the ratings. It has established a commanding lead over its rivals, particularly within the crucial advertiser demographic of viewers aged 25 to 50. Savannah's personal tragedy has coincided with NBC's most successful ratings period. This is not to suggest any involvement by the network. It is, however, a stark observation that the longer this story dominates the news cycle, the more revenue it generates. And the question of who benefits when a story remains in the public consciousness is one that must always be asked, regardless of how uncomfortable the answer might be. Sources have informed News Nation that Savannah is contemplating a permanent departure from the show. She reportedly harbors the belief that her mother was targeted as a direct result of her high-profile career, and she is unwilling to expose her family to further risk. According to one television executive, there is no way Savannah is coming back. Rumors were already circulating that she was planning to leave at the end of 2026. The kidnapping may have simply forced her hand, accelerating that timeline. But this is where that detail intersects with the conspiracy. If Savannah leaves the Today Show, her income stream is altered, her public visibility diminishes, the entire financial architecture of the family shifts. And whoever masterminded this crime did so with an unnervingly specific grasp of that financial structure. They knew what Savannah earned. They had searched for it online, from a device in Tucson. At this point, we must pause and be objective, because as tightly as this web of coincidences seems to wrap around Tommaso Cioni and Nancy Guthrie, there are pieces of evidence that strain the theory. The first is height. An investigative journalist, after a careful study of public photographs of Tommaso, concluded that he is significantly taller than the 5'9" to 5'10" range provided by the FBI. If this assessment is accurate, Tommaso is not the man on the porch. But that does not absolve him of involvement. It only clears him of being the one who executed the act. In an operation involving two individuals, the architect and the operative need not be the same person. This leads to the second counter-argument, the official clearance. On February 16th, Sheriff Nanos formally cleared the entire Guthrie family of any involvement. He stated they were cleared within the first few days, adding that they had voluntarily surrendered their phones, computers, vehicles, and even their homes. He urged the media to cease all speculation, labeling the family as victims, plain and simple. But this is where a fundamental misunderstanding of police procedure often occurs. To be cleared is not to be exonerated. It simply means that, at that moment, the existing evidence is insufficient to support filing criminal charges. In high-profile investigations, publicly clearing family members is often a strategic maneuver. It deflects media pressure, allowing investigators to operate without constant scrutiny, and most critically, it can lull a guilty party into a false sense of security, causing them to lower their guard. When law enforcement publicly states you are not a suspect, the instinctual human reaction is to lower your defenses, to abandon caution, to place a phone call you would have avoided just a day before, to check a Bitcoin wallet you have been too frightened to access. Publicly clearing someone isn't always a conclusion. Sometimes, it is a tactic. The genetic material discovered inside Nancy's home does not match any member of the family. The significance of this cannot be overstated. If Tommaso was physically at the scene during the abduction, he left no trace of his DNA. This leads to one of two conclusions. Either he was exceptionally careful, a trait consistent with a science teacher who understands biological evidence, or he was not physically present at all, which aligns with the theory of an accomplice. Or the DNA belongs to someone else entirely, meaning the definitive answer still lies dormant in a laboratory, and this opens the door to the stalker theory. The possibility that a stranger, harboring an obsessive fixation on Savannah Guthrie, targeted Nancy as a surrogate, a more vulnerable entry point, the path of least resistance toward the true object of their dark obsession. This theory reframes the perpetrator's behavior, not as familiarity with the house, but as a symptom of delusional entitlement. The suspect felt they belonged there because, within their distorted reality, they had already integrated themselves into the family unit. It cast the ransom notes sent to media outlets, not as a demand for money, but as a desperate cry for attention. And it explains the silence on the Bitcoin wallet as the action of someone for whom money was never the objective. But there is something the stalker theory cannot explain. It does not account for the dress rehearsal 9 days earlier. A delusional person, driven by pure obsession, does not typically conduct methodical trial runs from a calculated distance. That is the hallmark of operational planning. It also fails to explain the specific knowledge of Nancy's camera system and its subscription status. A stranger would be unaware that she lacked an active Nest account, and it does not explain why federal agents have visited the son-in-law's home on at least 5 occasions, searched the contents of his septic tank, and impounded his wife's vehicle. They removed the couple's security cameras and carried what appeared to be biological evidence out in a paper bag. As Megyn Kelly articulated on her program, the only reason investigators would repeatedly return to Nancy and Tommaso's house is because they are exploring their potential connection to the crime. She argued that it makes little sense for investigators to interview neighbors again and again, asking specifically about Nancy and Tommaso's character, unless they are methodically building a case. So, where does that leave us? On one side, you have a couple living just 4 miles from the victim, the last known people to have seen her alive. They have a 4-hour window with no substantiated public alibi. There is the ownership behavior on the porch, the calculated incompetence of the gear, the nitrile gloves, standard issue from a biology teacher's supply. There is a power of attorney signed 8 months before the crime, a bandmate with felony burglary convictions, an impounded vehicle, a septic tank that was searched, a disparity in property value, a book detailing kidnapping games, published 1 year before the actual abduction, and a paper bag, carried from their residence by federal agents. On the other side is the official narrative. No suspects, the family cleared, DNA evidence that does not match, a notable height discrepancy, and the theory that a complete stranger studied Nancy Guthrie's home for months, armed with a plan that disintegrated the moment it met with reality. As you are watching this, that paper bag is almost certainly resting inside a forensic laboratory. Technicians are meticulously comparing whatever it contains against the DNA from the glove found on the roadside and the sample recovered from inside Nancy's home. Genealogical databases are constructing vast family trees from even the most partial of matches. Every branch leads to more, and eventually, those branches will narrow to a single name. If that name is linked to the people who dined with Nancy just 4 hours before she disappeared, then every single coincidence we have just examined was never a coincidence. It was a pattern. The amateur disguise, the generic store-bought gear, the wrong type of holster, the reflective backpack. All of it was a performance, staged to make us look anywhere, but at the very people who already possessed keys to the front door. But if that name belongs to a stranger, then Tommaso is precisely what he seems to be, a quiet science teacher whose life was shattered by suspicion, simply because he had the profound misfortune of being the last person to say goodnight. And Annie Guthrie is a poet whose car was seized, and whose septic tank was excavated because the court of public opinion declared her guilty long before the evidence had its say. The DNA is indifferent to our theories. The DNA does not care about coincidence, or body language, or power of attorney documents, or unsettling books about kidnapping games. The DNA will deliver a verdict that no amount of performance can possibly conceal, and we are closer to that verdict than many people imagine. But before you leave, consider this. The January 23rd dress rehearsal footage didn't just give investigators a second incident to dissect, it gave them a second date to investigate. Until that recording surfaced, the fate of the entire investigation once rested upon a narrow, 4-hour chasm in time on the night of February 1st. Any person of interest needed only to account for their whereabouts between 9:50 p.m. and 2 a.m. on that single, specific evening. A sleeping spouse, a cell phone left charging on a nightstand, such things were enough to provide a solid alibi. But now, the rules of this grim game have been completely rewritten. The FBI is no longer concerned with just one question: where were you on the night Nancy disappeared? Now, their inquiry has taken a far more piercing turn. Where were you on January 23rd at 2 a.m.? And it is this very question that should send a current of dread through whoever is responsible. It is one thing to manufacture an alibi for the night of an actual crime, an event you know is coming. You meticulously plot your defense at the same moment you orchestrate the offense. You intentionally leave your phone behind. You ensure your car is parked in the driveway. You construct a digital ghost to mislead any who might follow. But January 23rd was merely a rehearsal, a seemingly random night, a full week before the main event. The perpetrator had no awareness of being captured on camera. They couldn't have known a dog's bark would mark their presence. Shielded by a false sense of security and invisibility, they almost certainly became careless. In all likelihood, their personal phone was in their pocket. They probably drove their own registered vehicle. There was no impetus to create a fabricated digital trail, because there was no reason to believe anyone would ever be looking. Investigators are undoubtedly in the process of conducting what is known as a tower dump. They are systematically pulling the records for every cell tower that services the area within a 6.5-mile radius of the home on the night of January 23rd. Their goal is to catalog every device that connected to those towers between 1 and 3 a.m. Subsequently, they will overlay that comprehensive list with the device data detected near the home on the 1st of February. In this mountain of digital noise, they are searching for a single, damning signal, the one phone number that appears in both data sets. If the phone belonging to Tommaso Cioni, or Annie, or any individual within their circle, materializes at the rehearsal location on January 23rd, and then again near the crime scene on February 1st, There is not a defense attorney in the world who could explain away such a profound coincidence. Fabricating a convincing alibi for one specific, anticipated night is a monumental task, but it is achievable. To retroactively invent an alibi for two separate nights, 9 days apart, without any knowledge that the first date is even under scrutiny, is a virtual impossibility. The suspect may have worn a mask to obscure their face, but they could not conceal the electronic signal pulsing silently from their pocket. And at this very moment, that signal may prove to be the most powerful witness in the entire case. And so, the question must be turned over to you. You have been presented with the evidence. You have analyzed the coincidences. You have considered the counter-arguments. Share your own conclusions in the comments below. Do you see this as the tragic narrative of a family caught in a living nightmare they had no part in creating? Or do you suspect that the nightmare was, in fact, born from within the family itself? Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 20 days. She is dependent on a pacemaker. She is in desperate need of her medication. And somewhere, some person knows what truly took place on the night of January 31st. Whether that person is a stranger lurking in the darkness or one of the people who kissed her goodnight 4 hours before she vanished, is the central mystery that will ultimately define this case. The DNA results are pending, and when they are released, we will be right here to break down precisely what they mean. Be sure to follow for updates as this story continues to unfold.